But before we begin, first of all, thanks for joining all of you. Again, once again, Nilesh, Ukti, Sue, and Keshava. Quick question about previous Gita discussions. I guess let me ask, is there anything, any comment, any question, uh, something that's been lingering in your mind about the Bhagavad Gita so far? We're going to start with the ninth chapter, which is smack middle of the Gita. After we finish the ninth chapter, we're pretty much at the midpoint of the Gita because it's 18 chapters. So in any case, I wanted to first, give the opportunity for anyone if they had any thoughts or concerns or questions that you'd like to bring up.
I actually do have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
You had mentioned something about Om,
Yeah.
chanting Om.
hmm
Is that equal as chanting the, the mantra?
The Hare Krishna month? Yeah. So it is equal and it's not equal. And the commentary on that statement is the following. At least two times, actually several times in the Gita, Krishna mentions that the syllable Om, and it's made up of three letters, A-U-M. So when you say the full A-U-M, it becomes Om, and that's considered, there are different names for it. It's like Omkar or Pranava. Pranava means Om. It's the primordial sound. And Om, Krishna says repeatedly that that's him. And in fact, in the ninth chapter also, we'll see that Krishna mentions that sound Om is non-different than him. So in that sense, it's equivalent. When you chant Om, you're directly, it's kind of like picking up the phone to connect with the divine, and you say hello. Om is saying hello, hello, like that. It's making that initial connection with the Supreme. That's how. So many mantras start with Om, but then they have a bunch of things after it, like Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, or if you know the Gayatri mantra, it starts with Om Bhur Bhuva Swa, like that. So many mantras start with Om because Om is kind of like the doorway into transcendence. That's that entry point. At the same time, Om is it gets you to transcendence. It doesn't necessarily fulfill the purpose for which you are approaching transcendence. It's kind of like telling God, hello, hello, hello. You say, yeah, hello, yeah, hello, yeah. What do you want? Like, what's the next thing you want to say, right? So Om is equivalent to the Supreme. It is very powerful. It is, you could say in one sense, equivalent to chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. But then the Hare Krishna mantra includes within it the hello part or the Om part, as well as a specific request, and that being it's a request to be in loving service unto the divine couple, the feminine and masculine aspects of divinity, to be in service to that. So that is the difference between Om and the Hare Krishna mantra.
Thank you.
Is that clear, or did I make it more?
No, it's clear. It's clear. Yeah.
Any other thought or question before we move on? Okay. So we have a smaller group today for whatever reason. And so, stop me whenever you like. Let's make this informal conversation style. I've got 9 chapter, I should say, sort of preface it with 9 chapters, perhaps one of the most important chapters in the Gita. Very powerful. Unlike the 8th chapter, which we did last week, the 9th chapter is filled filled with so many messages. It has 34 verses, deep. Each verses can be commented on for about an hour at least. So there's a lot of content, and I will try my best to present things in a way that is bite-sized and it can be digested. By the way, I should mention that I'm presenting today and not Prakash, because Prakash's entire family's health is not doing so well. So for whatever, unfortunately he couldn't do it this time. So I kind of scrambled at the last minute to put some slides together. But in any case, we're wishing him well, that his family recovers from the illnesses they're going through. I believe it's some virus stuff. So. So yeah, again, the request is to sort of keep this conversational, informal, stop me when you want, that kind of thing. All right. So I'll share my screen. All right, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so chapter 9. Chapter 9 is titled "The Most Confidential Knowledge." So the entire Bhagavad Gita is all about knowledge, and chapter 9 is the most confidential. And it's not confidential in the sense that it's a secret where you can't tell anybody else. It's most confidential because it's something so close to our hearts. It's knowledge that pertains to the most inner chambers of our being. So in our hearts, we have several layers of existence of who we are. We have identities that cover us. At the core of who our true identity is, that's most confidential. And so from that standpoint, it's considered the most confidential knowledge because it speaks to our eternal identity, the sense of self that goes beyond, what people gives us names for. Like for myself, as an example, I'm called a father, I'm called a husband, I'm called a son, a brother, an employee, manager, a leader. I've been given a lot of like labels, and some of you have also been received labels. But then beyond those labels, as we peel off all of those identities that are either temporary and don't have necessarily anything to do with us ultimately, then we peel off all of those identities at the core of who we really, really are. That's most confidential. The second reason it's confidential is that confidential is not everybody can access confidential information, right? Even though like there's confidential classified information in the government, some presidents don't keep it so confidential or classified, for which they get into trouble sometimes. But this knowledge is the kind of knowledge that even if you were to give it to others, very few will actually get it. And that's why it's confidential. So you could scream these verses from the Gita from a rooftop, but the amount of persons that might actually be able to access it and understand it are very, very, very few. So we learned in the beginning of the 7th chapter is that Krishna says that those who can understand this knowledge are 1 in a million. And then those who actually apply this knowledge and reach perfection are one of those million who have understood the knowledge. So it's confidential in that sense as well. It's not secret, but it's not easily accessible for persons not pursuing spiritual knowledge. So these are the various sections in chapter 9. So you remember the sections. We have 5 sections, A, B, C, D, E. The first section is very small. It's only text 1 to 3. It talks about hearing about Krishna. Some people may think Krishna is a Hindu god that is a historical personality, etc., etc. Maybe a mythological person, a fictional character, etc. So those are all misunderstandings of what Krishna is. Krishna, the concept of Krishna is universal, um, deeply serious and subtle, and there's specific qualifications and disqualifications to be able to hear and understand and grasp and assimilate the content about Krishna. So that's the first section. The second section, section B, is about the knowledge of greatness of Krishna. And then it talks about Krishna's relationship with the material world. I've put in red here something called Achintya Beda Beda. Achintya Beda Abeda. Achintya means inconceivable, Beda means difference, and Abeda means non-difference. So there's a inconceivable, simultaneous difference and non-difference between God and creation and the world. And so we'll look into that. Section C is text 11 through 15. It talks about who are persons disinclined for spiritual growth, also known as non-devotees. And then we'll also learn about the various grades of devotees. So section D is text 16 through 25. And this is with Krishna is the supreme object of worship, understanding how Krishna is the supreme object of worship. The last section is my favorite section, section E. This section talks about the sweetness and the glories of directly worshiping Krishna. It's where, so everything else from text 1 through 25 is the foundation, is a bedrock upon which Bhakti Yoga can be practiced. Bhakti Yoga is directly expressed in text 26 to 34. And we hear in this last section about this very sweet exchange between the living entity and the Supreme. It's delightful, it's enticing, it's attractive, it's what the heart wants. Ultimately, we're looking for love, and the supreme loving relationship between the soul and the super soul is discussed in this last section. So it's really, really, really nice. All right. So the first section, section A, hearing about Krishna, qualifications and disqualifications. So basically, in summary, Krishna says, a person is non-envious. It allows one to hear confidential knowledge about Krishna. On the other hand, if one is faithless, that makes it difficult, and it forces one into birth and death. In other words, one will continue the cycle of taking on another material body and then living through birth, death, disease, old age, then dying, and then taking on another material body, and so forth. So that force behind repeated reincarnations is faithlessness. On the other hand, if there's some degree of faith, then one can get transcendental knowledge and get liberated and be outside of the material body into the spiritual world, living a happy life. Okay, so text 1 is we talked about it, free from envy. What is the qualification to receive this most confidential knowledge? Krishna uses the word anusuyave in text 1, being free from envy. And how to receive the knowledge? Through proper hearing. Proper hearing means attentiveness with open-mindedness, with an inquisitive spirit that is asking questions, relevant questions, and hearing from the right person. Person meaning, or persons who are connected to a line of spiritual teachers known as disciplic succession. If we're connected to a disciplic succession, then we know that we're receiving knowledge as it was meant to be expressed. It's not speculation, it's not somebody's whim and fancy, rather it's carefully handed down fruit of transcendental knowledge coming all the way from the Supreme. And what's the benefits? In text 1, Krishna says that by proper hearing, without envy, one gets relief from miseries of material existence. So in chapters 2 and 3, we learn confidential knowledge, which is basically knowledge of the soul versus knowledge of the body. So it's useful for liberation. It's the very beginning. It's confidential. More confidential is where we recently completed chapter 7 and 8, which is understanding knowledge of the Supreme and the energies of the Supreme. And finally, this chapter is most confidential because it's dealing with the relationship. So now that we have understood who we are, who is the Supreme, and then most confidential is who we, the living entity, engages in relationship of pure devotion with the Supreme. So therefore it's most confidential. I'm going to skip this, really go really quickly with this slide. It's basically saying there's 9 processes of devotional service. There's 9 processes of bhakti yoga. And these are the processes, right? There's hearing about Krishna. There's chanting or glorifying Krishna. There's remembering the Supreme. There's serving the lotus feet, or serving, having that mood of humble service. There's deity worship, praying. There's becoming a servant, engaging in friendship, like the mood of trying to be a friend to the Supreme, and then complete surrender. So these are considered the 9, excuse me, these are considered the 9 processes of bhakti yoga or devotional service. So text 2, Krishna goes on to discuss this knowledge that he is about to continue to share with Arjuna. He says, please hear this in text 1, please hear this free from envy. In a proper way, you'll achieve freedom from material distress. Now he talks about this knowledge. He says it's Raja Vidya, means the king of all knowledge. Raja Guhyam is the most confidential knowledge. So that's where the title of the chapter comes from, this Sanskrit phrase called Raja Guhyam, or the most confidential knowledge. These are eye charts. Don't worry too much about all of the text, but I'll point you to what's important. Here in the middle here is another phrase used in text 2, Pavitram idam uttamam, which means this kind of confidential knowledge purifies the heart from sinful tendencies or acting outside of our value systems or genuine value systems. So that's what this knowledge does. It gives us a clean heart, purified motivations, and thereby, we can live more peacefully and happily in this world. And this kind of knowledge on this right, it talks about the cycle of sin. So right now we may experience various sufferings. Sufferings are due to manifest karma. Manifest karma is because the right time has come for the fructification of our unmanifest karma. So we keep accumulating karma moment to moment. And that karma, when the right time is there, then it becomes manifest, and then one experiences suffering. But before there's actual unmanifest karma, is one performs some kind of sinful act or some wrong act or something like that. But before one performs a act like that, there's desire that fuels the action. And before there's desire that fuels the action, there's a disposition of some kind of sin. So there's a cycle. So when there's disposition, it brings about desire, that brings about action, that brings about reactions. that's stored on unmanifest, and then it becomes manifest because the time is right, and then we experience suffering. So what gets all of this cycle started is avidya, or ignorance, and this transcendental knowledge destroys ignorance and therefore destroys ultimately suffering. This is the science behind how suffering reduces for the bhakti yogi. The third quality here is, or fourth quality is pratyakshavagamam, means that one can have, through this transcendental knowledge, you can have direct perception of the self by realization. You gain transcendental wisdom, and you can actually get a felt sense of that we're not the body, that I'm a spiritual being. You get a felt sense of there's the presence of God in my life. And so, one's faith starts to grow by this feature of direct perception. It's called pratyakshavagamam. You see it's true. It actually happens. So 3 other things that Krishna says is dharmyam, it's the perfection of religion. It's susukham, it's very blissful. It's blissfully practiced. And then the transcendental realization is also very happy and blissful, and it's everlasting. So all good stuff. This is like a strong marketing program for confidential transcendental knowledge. And then text 3, Krishna speaks about, again, this is an eye chart, lots of stuff here, but I'll take your attention to the right side. He makes the comment, Krishna makes a comment that those who are ashraddha, Sanskrit means faithless, or don't have shraddha, that for them, unfortunately, there isn't faith, that there isn't hope necessarily of getting perfection, in that they will continue to repeat and experience birth and death. So what is faith anyway? And so there's a definition here given of faith. Simply by serving Krishna, one can achieve all perfection. Just as one might water the root of the tree and know that all parts of the tree will get nourished. So how do you get faith anyway? It's by the association of those who have faith, devotees. Just like, how do you get, I know for me, how did I become really, I never liked football. That's American football. I never liked it. But when I came to college here in the United States and I hung out with people who liked football, all of a sudden I started to like football. Of course, now I don't watch much football or any football right now. But it happens through the association of those who have that quality and that faith. Oh, this is really good stuff. You'll enjoy watching football. You should watch football too. So like that, faith is created by association, or faith in the divine is created by those who have that conviction in divinity. And then this green arrow here shows qualities of those at the lowest level of faith. Then there's a second level of faith, and then this light green version talks about the olive green that talks about the highest level of faith. Right? In the highest level of faith, one has no chance of kind of getting veered off the track or being dissuaded from the practice of spiritual consciousness. So we talked about this watering the root of the tree, and all other parts and limbs of the tree get nourished. That's faith, is where you give attention to one core aspect of your life, knowing that all other aspects of your life will get necessary energy. All right, so that was a summary of the first section, text 1 to 3. I'll pause there and see if any comments or thoughts or questions at this point before we move on. All right. We go to text 4 to text 10, which is section B. And this is philosophy a little bit. This is knowledge of the greatness of Krishna, which is the Achintya Bheda Bheda philosophy. It means there's a oneness and difference between Krishna and creation. So knowing this, getting this knowledge about Krishna and creation, it stimulates reverence and devotion if one has faith when they hear about how the entire universe is created and maintained and even annihilated by the Supreme. This is a nice picture, isn't it? By the way, this is one universe, and the image behind Krishna is an image of the entire cosmic creation. One of these balls is one universe, and there's several balls, as you can see. Each ball is a universe in itself. And this painting takes from various Vedic texts what the structure of universe is and various planetary systems within each universe. Fascinating for those of us that have some interest in the cosmos. So text 4, Krishna basically says, by me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. Here's a picture of Vishnu, and it is a form of, Vishnu is a form of Krishna that is specifically given the duty of pervading the entire universe. So at every atom, in fact, is pervaded by the Supreme. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. So the analogy of a sunshine is given, which is all pervasive. Just as there's the sun, and then the energy of the sun pervades the entire earth, plant, you could say. Similarly, the Supreme in his abode has his energies, and his by his potencies, they pervade the entire universe that we live in. I'll skip this. So here's an analogy. A king heads a government, which is but the manifestation of the king's energy. The different government departments are nothing but the energies of the king, and each department is resting on the king's power. Similarly, all the manifestations that we see and everything that exists, both in this world and in the spiritual world, are resting on the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And as soon as the king dies or is kicked out of the government, now all of a sudden you have anarchy. But it's the king's energy and the king's presence that keeps the government going. Now Krishna then says in the next text, and yet, even though he's within everything, he says, and yet everything that is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulence. So he's kind of saying, everything rests in me and everything doesn't rest in me. So there's a little bit of a paradox here. What's going on? So the paradox is there's a difference. Krishna says there's a difference between me and creation. But there's also a connection. There's a oneness. So there's a difference between God and creation, and it's important because it helps to awaken the mood of servitude. But there's also oneness between us and God because we need this oneness for a closer loving relationship. So are we God? Yes and no. We're God in that we are parts and parcels of God, but we're not God in that we can't create a universe as much as we want to or like to. And ultimately for love, there's got to be this two aspects, oneness and difference. Just like for a couple, let's say for a husband and wife that are well situated in their marriage relationship, there's a sense of oneness. As a package, they're a couple. That's why they say couple. Yeah, they live together, they generally make decisions together, etc., etc. There's a oneness. Yet there's a difference for them to actually love each other, because if there isn't a difference, you can't really serve the other one and their needs and their likes and dislikes and so forth. So similarly, the philosophy of love, when we apply it to Krishna or God, there's that oneness for that closeness of the relationship, and there's a difference. Otherwise, there wouldn't be service. There's difference of identity, and there's difference of potency and preferences, even likes and dislikes. So Krishna says in text 4, all beings are in me. And in text 5, he says, everything that is created does not rest in me. So it's like a conundrum, how to understand this. So in text 6, Krishna explains the analogy of the sky and the wind. So let's follow along here. Sky is the biggest manifestation to conceive. In that sky, the wind is the biggest to conceive within the sky. The wind is great and influence all movements, but the wind is never bound beyond the sky. It is always subordinate to the sky. The wind rests on the sky. Just as the Lord is aloof and unaffected like the sky, and not affected by the movements of the wind. So the sky remains steady, and the wind is within the sky moving around and can do whatever it likes. But the support for the wind is the sky. So similarly, the Lord, the Supreme, is the support for creation, and things may happen within creation, but he himself is not affected, if that makes sense. Again, this is philosophically a little bit deep and maybe challenging to understand. And it sometimes may take several readings and meditation to understand what this is saying. But Krishna is trying to establish this fundamental relationship between the Supreme and creation. So he continues, the whole cosmic order is under me. Under my will, it is automatically manifested again and again. And under my will, it is annihilated at the end. So he establishes really strongly in this section of the Gita that beyond everything is Krishna. All this work cannot bind me. I am ever detached from these material activities, seated as though neutral. So there's a nice example of the judge. A high court judge is neutral, although by his order someone is punished and someone is rewarded. Similarly, Krishna is neutral with respect to the material activities carried out by his potencies. Some people want to blame God for nonsense that happens in this world, right? It was caused by God. But we see there's a very subtle distinction between God's sanction versus God's will. And we must not see evil in this world as God's will. Rather, it may be God's sanction, which is very different. So Krishna goes on to say, this material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, producing all moving and non-moving beings. So all in the same sort of theme. So that's, sorry, I think it's the last slide of this section. Just as a man injects living entities into a woman's womb, but is not involved with the process of the manifestation, Krishna injects the living entities into material nature by his glance, but he's not directly involved with their activities. So therefore, Krishna talks about himself in the 14th chapter as the seed-giving father, Bija Prada Pita, he says, which means he gives a seed in material nature for living entities to be born and continue their lives, but he's not directly controlling them and their choices. Living entities make their own choices. All right, I'll pause there for a little bit and see if there's any question or comment on sections 1 and 2 of chapter 9. We're going to start section 3 now, section C.
Yamuna Prabhu,
Yeah.
can you briefly talk about God's sanction versus God's will? I didn't quite understand the difference between those two.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's a big topic. Sometimes we hear the statement, nothing moves without the will of God. So not even a blade of grass will move without the will of God. We may hear that. Nothing moves without God's sanction. Now, God has created, Krishna's, in this section we just learned about Krishna's creation, and Krishna has a particular desire for creation. It might be helpful to use an analogy. Keep in mind, to understand spiritual subject matters, using a material analogy is close, but it's not exact. With that disclaimer, let me give the analogy of prison. So the government creates prison, and the purpose of a prison house is it's a place of punishment, but it's also a place of correction. So the desire of the government in creating a prison is to keep elements of society away from the rest of wholesome society so that society can move on and work well. At the same time, the other purpose is to help those persons who are now relegated to prison to grow in their consciousness and become righteous beings so they can join back society. Right? So those are the two purposes of prison. And that's the intention, or that's the will of the government. Now, while in prison, a prisoner may choose to not fulfill the second purpose, which is to be corrected. And the prisoner may choose to cause more trouble. We hear all kinds of stuff that happens in prison. Oh my goodness, it's horrific at times. And it's not what the jail warden wants. It's not what ultimately the government wants, but it's something that they have to deal with. Similarly, the creation that we're in has within it God's will and God's sanction. God's will or God's desire is that we as individual souls become elevated in consciousness and get out of this cycle of birth and death. We don't want to deal with this. He doesn't want us to deal with this cycle of birth and death, and so that the soul can go back into the spiritual kingdom, back with God, with be happy. That's what he wants. That's his will. Yet he sanctions persons to do good acts or bad acts because of their desire. He gives a little bit of independence to every living entity, just as in jail, every prisoner has the opportunity to exercise free will. And when they've exercised their free will in a bad way, then the prisoner is sent to solitary confinement, where they have less independence and less choices that they're able to make. Similarly, for someone who engages in, let's say, really evil acts, Krishna may sanction them, but then they are in future lives or in this very life, they are put in situations where their karma gets back to them, and they are unable to exercise the amount of free will they were able to previously exercise, like that. Ultimately, nothing can happen without God's sanction. But just because something happens, it doesn't mean it's God's will. It's not what he wants necessarily, but he allows it to happen for many reasons. Who knows what those reasons are? One of the key reasons, though, is to allow for the independent living entity to make independent choices. As a parent, we have similar things, right? I mean, we sanction our children to do stuff that we may know is not the best for them, but we sanction because they really insistent. They want to do it. They want to do it. And we say, okay, fine. Hoping that they will learn in the course of time, even though it's not the best choice for them. So a parent may sanction even though the parent doesn't will it. Similarly, God may sanction even though he doesn't will it.
Thank you so much for explaining it. Thank you, Yamuna Prabhu.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, let's move on. Text 11 through 15. Krishna speaks about non-devotees and grades in devotees. I'm going to skip the introductory section here. All right. So in text 11, Krishna makes a statement that people don't understand him. People speculate about who God is and say that, you know, this is his language, actually. In Sanskrit, it says, avajananti ma mudha. It uses the word mudha. Mudha means fools, or literally, mudha in Sanskrit means ass. So he says, asses or fools deride me. They make fun of me, they mock me, whatever. When I descend in the human form, they do not know that my transcendental nature is the supreme Lord of all that be. Really important. It's sometimes hard. I mean, I've been sharing the message of Bhagavad Gita for, gosh, almost 20 years now. And I've noticed, you know, across all kinds of demographic, all kinds of ages, it's sometimes hard for people to accept that ultimately God is a person and that God has a form, spiritual form. And God, he may even be human-like, but it's not human, but human-like. It's a lot easier generally for people to understand God as an energy or as a super soul within the hearts of everyone. It's a lot easier, but to understand or to recognize that God's actually a person that can descend and walk among us like one of us is almost impossible, sometimes really difficult. So Krishna makes the statement here is that ultimately, you know, for those who deny that God can do that, why can't he do that? I mean, if he's God, he should be able to do this, to descend in a human form. He says that unfortunately they deride me. And what's the result of those kind of people? Well, they are bewildered by the material world, they're bewildered by atheistic views, and in that deluded conditions, their hopes for liberation, their culture of knowledge, etc., all defeated, unfortunately. One might see that those who are, let's say, atheistic actually do very well in this world sometimes. But what happens to the soul? The soul ultimately is not benefited, and therefore they're defeated. Here's a background picture of an atomic bomb, I guess. So Krishna then goes on to describe this very important word called Mahatma. Some of you may have heard this word Mahatma, where he says those who are not deluded, the great souls, the Mahatmas.
Can I stop you for a second? Your slides aren't being shared.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good call, Nilesh.
We're good now.
Okay. Yeah, so those who are not deluded, the great souls, under the protection of divine nature, they're fully engaged in devotional service, knowing me to be the Supreme. This is a definition of a great soul, or Mahatma, is that they're under the protection of divine nature and always engaged in devotional service. That's his definition, Krishna's definition anyway, in the Gita. So what are the external activities of the Mahatma? Here's the Sanskrit. It's the verse says, Satatam kirtayanto mam, yatantascha dridavata, namasyantascha mam bhaktya nitya yukta pasate. So, which means, one who's always chanting my glories, that is very determined, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. So, if there's devotion, if there's bhakti, and that bhakti comes out, that love comes out in the means of chanting, endeavoring, bowing, etc., then Krishna says these are the external activities of a Mahatma. There may be some people who don't directly worship Krishna. And so, text 15, Krishna says, these people are great too. They're not as great as text 14, but they're great too. So, the first kind of persons are ekatvena, those who worship the one without a second. So, those who worship themselves as God, or those who worship, this effulgent spiritual light called Brahman. So they are also great souls, and they're regarded that way, Krishna says. There are people who worship prataktvena bahuda, meaning diverse in many. They might pull up some concocted or speculative form of the Supreme, and they worship that Supreme. They may worship a whole bunch of demigods, like in general India. You have so many temples of different gods, and it's like, which ice cream flavor do you like? Pick that ice cream flavor from the various temples that have so many different gods. So that's worshiping the Supreme in many forms. And then the third one is considering the universe to be the supreme organism and worship that. So they worship material nature. They worship nature in general. They are awe-inspired by the cosmos, and they worship the cosmos. So these are three different kinds of indirect worshippers of Krishna. All right, so that's section 3 that talked about the various grades of devotees and those who are non-devotees. Any comments or questions before we move on? All right. So we'll go on to the section D, or the 4th section. I think we're doing good on time. I'm liking this. I thought we're not going to be able to cover too much, but it's good. All right. So section D, there's two subsections to section D. The first section talks about how Krishna manifests in all things of this world, and we'll go through that list. It's a very nice list. And then the second section talks about what happens to those who are worshippers of demigods, or worshippers of humans that they consider to be godlike, maybe sports athletes or cinema stars or politicians and so forth. So that Krishna speaks about that in text 20 to 25. Here, by the way, is a picture of Krishna. It's a very nice story of Krishna and the Brahmin, or a priest, or I would say a learned person. So this person is a learned person. His name is Sudama. This is Krishna, and this is his queen, one of his queens called Rukmini. And Krishna is very kindly serving him. It's such a sweet exchange. The reason I put this picture in here is because one of the things that Krishna says in this list of verses is he says that he's the most dear friend. Even though he's the supreme, he is and can be the most dear friend of his devotees. So Krishna says, I am the ritual, I am the sacrifice, the offering to the ancestors, the healing herb, the transcendental chant, I'm the butter, the fire, and the offering. In Vedic sacrifices, these are all of the features that go into a Vedic sacrifice. There's fire, there's butter or ghee, there's the offerings, there's all kinds of things that happen in a formal, ritualistic Vedic sacrifice. Krishna makes the point that all of those features of the Vedic sacrifice are him. And then he goes on to say, I'm the father of this universe, the mother, the support, and the grandsire. I'm the object of knowledge, the purifier, and this is to your question, Ukti. Krishna is saying, I'm the purifier and the syllable Om. Check it out. He says, I'm Omkar. I'm also the Rig, the Sama, and Yajur Vedas. These are three different kinds of Vedic texts. He continues, I'm the goal, I'm the sustainer, the master, the witness, the abode, the refuge, and the most dear friend. So, my dear friends who are on the call, sometimes we might feel the need for a very dear friend. I invite you to try this out. Just have a conversation with Krishna in your heart and just talk to him, because he's there, all of our hearts. And he's our most dear friend that we can access at any given time in our deepest of sorrows and our most jubilant of joys. That most dear friend is accessible. And Krishna's saying here is like, hello, I'm there if you'd like to make that connection. He continues, I'm the creation and the annihilation, the basis of everything, the resting place, and the eternal seed. And then the last verse in this particular subsection is, I give heat, I withhold and send forth rain, I'm immortality, I'm also death personified, both spirit and matter are in me. So as you can see, he gives this sort of like comprehensive understanding of what the Supreme is. The Supreme is not just some old guy with a long white beard sitting up there judging us. That's not the idea of the Supreme in the Bhagavad Gita. It's a lot warmer and inviting conception of Krishna that's presented here. So what happens for those who worship demigods or worship humans as gods? It's said that Krishna says those who worship demigods are worshipping him also, but indirectly. Avidi Purvakam is the Sanskrit. And so what happens for those who worship demigods? Well, they're purified of sinful reactions. They become pious. They actually enter into heavenly regions and they enjoy godly delights. However, after they've exhausted that karma, they return back to this mortal planet again. And a picture that shows this is a Ferris wheel. So if you worship demigods and you try to promote yourself to heaven, well, it's like being on a Ferris wheel. After your pious credits are over, your bank account of karma is done, then the Ferris wheel starts to go down again. That's material life. And so Krishna, it's perhaps a little revolutionary, but Krishna says, don't pursue heaven, because heaven is attractive, godly delights and all that, but it's not the place for the soul. It's not the ultimate happiness and joy of the soul. Smack middle of this section, Krishna presents a very important text for those who are pure devotees, and how are their necessities taken care of? Because people might think, I might not get my necessities taken care of unless I worship some kind of demigod, or unless I worship some kind of human god. But this is a story of a very nice story, which we probably don't have time to get into, but there's a great saint by the name Madhavendra Puri. And Krishna, he made the commitment that he would not go beg for food, and he would not necessarily work. He was a renunciate, he was a monk. And Krishna made the arrangement. Krishna was, this is 500 years ago or so. Krishna made the arrangement for him to get his food every day somehow. In fact, he personally would come and give him food. So Krishna says in this verse, text 22, But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, to them I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have. Sanskrit is Yoga Kshema Vahamiham. Yoga Kshema Vahamiham. Yoga means I carry what they lack, and Kshema, I preserve what they have. Nice. And then Krishna says, those who worship demigods will take birth among the demigods, means they go to heaven. Those who worship ancestors go to the ancestors. Those who worship ghosts and spirit will take birth among such beings. In other words, it doesn't mean you can worship anyone and it's all going to reach the same goal. That doesn't work that way. So this says, worshippers go where their faith is reposed, as consciousness naturally carries them to that to which they are attracted. So we have to accept one object of worship or another as our goal. And so that's the question. Who do I worship? And I'll invite you to think about that. Who is it that you worship in your heart? Everybody has to, not everybody. I should say that all of us have within us some kind of role model, and we have some kind of person or persons we look up to. Who is it that we look up to? Or what is it that we look up to? What is our goal? What is it that we hold as ideals in our life? And key to that question is, worshippers ultimately go where their faith is reposed, as their consciousness naturally carries them to that which they have attracted. Some time for considering for ourselves. Where is it that I repose my faith? Who is it that I follow? Who is it that I see as a role model? What is my goal of life? What am I aiming for? Because naturally the consciousness, maybe we don't even consciously know it. Maybe we're subconsciously driven by certain value systems or by certain people that we probably don't want to be motivated by. But we may be motivated by certain relationships or certain people that we are looking up to subconsciously. So it's good to know what drives us, what motivates us, because ultimately that's the destination we likely will achieve. Okay, so I'm going to pause there before the last section. Section E is the last section of chapter 9. Any comments or questions with section 4?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, Neil?
If God created all of us, then why is there an issue of having faith in him?
Let me ask your question another way to see if I've got your question right. Would another way to ask your question is, why can't just God give all of us faith and then we all be fine and happy?
Exactly.
I'll use the analogy of a parent because I think it speaks, for us it hits home. We are parents. God is a parent to us. Wants ultimately the purpose of our existence ultimately is to engage in loving relationship with the Supreme. As a parent, we might force our kids to do certain things up to the age of maybe 7 or 8. I don't know it lasts much beyond that. We can force them. We can kind of say, hey, you better respect your parents, right? Like, get me a glass of water, or, say good morning when you wake up instead of just ignoring your parents, respect your elders, whatever. We might get them to do those behaviors when they're young. But when there's an opportunity to truly engage in a loving relationship with our kids, we don't want to do that. We want from the child that there's natural, voluntary affection. Like Father's Day just passed, right? And you would recently befriended me on Facebook, so I saw there was a picture of your kids, taking you somewhere. And it's like, oh, that's really sweet. You wouldn't want to force that. You would want that to come natural from the children, because ultimately it's a relationship of love. Similarly, the relationship of love between us and the Supreme is just that. God gives us the freedom to choose whether to repose our faith in Him or not, and to engage in a loving relationship with Him or not. It's up to us. He's giving us the opportunity, He's giving us the guidance of how to do it, and then we can make the choice, yes or no. Or yes with a maybe. Or largely no, a little bit less, a little bit of yes. So I mean, there's gradations, there's shades of gray. It's not just black and white of how we respond to that invitation from Krishna. But because there's love, ultimately it's a relationship of love. Because it's love, there has to be free will. And when there's free will, there's some people who are going to choose no. Just like when you have a bunch of kids, some kids are going to say no.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that satisfy you, or you feel something?
Yeah, no, it makes some sense. I mean, I still have to have some reflection and some thought more into it. I mean, this is deep stuff, obviously, and it doesn't just come right away. But yeah, it makes you think a little bit more. I mean, it helps me think a little bit more onto getting my own answer. Obviously, you have to satisfy yourself with these answers and questions that you have.
Yeah, good point. All right, anything else before we complete the last section here? Okay. Okay, so section E is the last sections about the sweetness and glories of directly worshiping Krishna. There's a lot of text here. I'm going to move on so that we cover time. So in text 26, Krishna says, if one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, not many leaves, just a leaf, a fruit, flower, or water, I will accept it. Ashnami. And in this verse, actually, I don't have it in the slides here, but Krishna, the verse goes like this. It's Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam Yome Bhaktya Prayachati Tadham Bhaktyo Pratam Ashnami Prayatatmana. Twice in that verse, the word bhakti is used. So here twice in this verse, it says love and devotion, which is a similar word. But if one offers me with love and devotion, a leaf, a flower, fruit, or water, I will accept it. Doesn't matter what social status or wealth one may have, everyone can offer a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or even some water to Krishna. But the key ingredient is not so much our wealth or the presentation or what have you. The key ingredient is love. And that's what attracts the Supreme. I mean, because if the Supreme has everything, has created everything, what can us offering anything to the Supreme be of value? Because it's zero value. But if there is affection that's driving it, that affection is what, by some commentators say, is the affection that gives Krishna an appetite. It's the love that gives him an appetite to want to consume the leaf, the flower, the vegetable, the fruit, or the water, etc. So text 26. So what type of sacrifice Lord desires to be offered? So he talks about, vegetarian stuff, basically. That's what he likes to receive. Why? We get purified. And what should be the attitude of offering? The most important element in preparation, in serving, and offering is love. Text 27, Krishna says, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever austerities you perform, whatever duties you might perform, sacrifices, etc., do that as an offering to me, he says. So whether we work, take care of our kids, go to the gym, fill gas in our car, what else? What other mundane activities? Use the bathroom, do everything, take a shower, do everything as an offering unto Krishna. That's what he's recommending. So this is the Bhakti Yoga principle. Moment to moment, our consciousness is with divinity. It's a place of peace, happiness, joy, contentment, shelter, warmth, connection, etc. So I'm going to move on. This is a lot of text. Okay, text 28. What's the result of acting in that way, offering everything to Krishna with the mind fixed on Krishna? Two things. Just look at the red stuff. One gets liberated from material bondage, and you get realization of Krishna. Text 29, Krishna says, I am not partial. I'm equal to everyone. I envy no one. So this is his super soul aspect. Within each of our hearts is a super soul aspect. In the Sanskrit is samaham sarvas bhuteshu, means sama. In Sanskrit, sama means equal. In English, the word is same, equal. I'm same, have the same attitude towards everyone, right? It was really interesting. You have Sanskrit and English are pretty close in that regard. So he says, I envy no one, nor am partial to anyone. I'm equal to all. However, in the same text, he says, two, use the word two, but whoever renders service unto me is a devotion and friend, is in me, and I'm also a friend to him. What? That's contradictory to saying being not partial. You're being a friend to his devotee. So there's a super soul aspect of Krishna and there's a supreme person aspect of Krishna. This is very natural. Just like a father may have a lot of kids or mother may have a number of kids, the kid that wants a relationship, who renders some service to the parent, naturally the parent will be a little more inclined to engage as a loving parent to that child. It's just natural. So similarly, Krishna does the same. And then Krishna says, even if a devotee is imperfect, even if he acts terribly and does something terrible, Krishna said that person should be considered a saint. Why? If they are properly situated in their determination for God consciousness and spiritual emancipation or spiritual realization, if they're determined, if they're still wanting that as their goal, then one should consider them saintly. Krishna says he quickly becomes righteous and attains lasting peace. So here we see the sweetness of the relationship between Krishna and the devotees being described. Even if the devotee makes mistakes, Krishna says, I welcome him with open arms because he has his goal and his determination fixed in the right direction. I consider that person a saint. It's so nice, actually. So Krishna then says in text 31, my devotee never perishes. In the right, there's a nice story in the Mahabharata. It's a book where the Bhagavad Gita is embedded. And it's a story of Bhishma Dev, who was his devotee. Even though he was in a bed of arrows, he didn't really perish until Bhishma Dev himself decided that he wanted to leave his body. So Krishna makes this promise, my devotee never perishes. Perishes from spiritual cultivation, perishes from spiritual consciousness. It's not that the devotee never dies. The devotee will die. Every material body will die. But it's the soul that's enlivened in Krishna consciousness that will never perish. So then Krishna goes on to say, who's qualified to take have this very affectionate relationship with Krishna. Who's qualified? He says, those who take shelter in me, though they may be of lower birth, can attain the supreme destination. Here's a nice story of an elephant, actually. It's in the Srimad Bhagavatam, elephant making a connection with the Supreme. So Arjuna is, a saintly king. So Krishna says, what to speak of person like you? You're a saintly king. You too, for sure, can attain the supreme destination. Therefore, having come to this temporary, miserable world, engage in loving service unto me. This is his penultimate verse. Some of you may remember in in chapter 8, Krishna uses the same two phrases, temporary and miserable, that the world we live in. And again in chapter 9, he says, the world that we live in is temporary and miserable. Therefore, now that you're here, engage in loving service unto me. In the final verse of this chapter, he gives 4 recommendations. Engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. By the way, this verse is repeated again in chapter 18. Smack middle of the Bhagavad Gita is end of chapter 9, is smack middle, and that verse gives these 4 things. And maybe I can share that with you and show you how this works. So this is Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, text 34. If you look at the Sanskrit, it says, Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Okay. Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. You go to chapter 18, the end of the Gita, right just before Krishna kind of ends his commentary. Look at this. Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Same set of Sanskrit words. It's conclusive. It's the end of chapter 9 and end of chapter 18. Krishna makes the same recommendation or encouragement for Arjuna. Engage your mind always thinking of me and become my devotee. Offer obeisances to me and worship me. So, and that's the conclusion of the most confidential knowledge. After understanding we're the spiritual being, understanding the position of the Supreme, now how do we engage in that relationship? That's discussed here in text 34, the most confidential knowledge. All right, so that concludes our chapter 9. Any comment or question from this last section? Any reflections, any point that you're sort of like taking with you from this discussion?
I do have a question.
Mhm.
You had said that we as bodily beings have a hard time seeing God in other human beings. Is that right? Or, I mean,
What I was trying, that is certainly true what you said. But what I was saying was, what I was trying to say was that we have a hard time accepting that God can be like a human walking among us. Like God can take an incarnation as a human to be with us. I was saying that that's hard to accept or see. But your point is also very well taken. We find it very hard to see the divinity within others as well, and therefore offer the kind of respect we'd like to offer them,
okay. And okay, so our souls are eternal, correct? Our
Yes.
bodies are temporary, correct?
Yes.
If we do not reach moksha, where does our soul go?
So that's discussed in several places in the Gita, including this 9th chapter. if you recall in chapter 8, Krishna uses the, actually, you know what? If is it okay, I'll share with you exactly when the Gita he speaks it so that you can refer to it at a later time.
Is there some sort of a cycle?
Yes. So let me share my screen here with you. Can you see it?
Yes.
So this is in chapter 8, text 6. We looked at that last week. So Krishna says, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So where does your question is, if you don't get moksha, where do you go? Right? And the answer to that question is, the living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another as the air carries aromas. Thus, he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. So the soul and the mind and the intelligence, they go to a different body in the next life based on the karma of the current body. So whatever actions we perform in this life, it drives where we will go in our next life. And this concept is repeated in the Gita. Let me see if I can find it right here. Yeah. So those who are in the mode of goodness, so if you live your life in the mode of goodness, the soul will take a body in the higher planets. So you are peaceful, you have good knowledge, you're generally happy, you help others, etc. That's mode of goodness. You will then take a birth, the soul will take a birth in the higher planets, in heavens. If someone is in the mode of passion, very intent on making money, very intent on achieving great things, etc., etc., if they're in the mode of passion primarily, they will take a body as another human being in this earthly planet. And then those in the abominable mode of ignorance, let's say you're destructive, you hurt others, envious, destroy yourself, like self-destructive behavior, then they enter into hellish worlds or animal bodies. They take an animal body and things like that. So that's where the soul goes based on consciousness. Does that answer your question, Ukti?
Yes, but when you talked about, like, I think you had mentioned some sort of a cycle with Satyug and Raj or Tamyug. I can't remember what that was.
Yeah.
But are we going through that cycle?
Yes, we are. I think I think I know what you're talking about. So we're going through various yuga cycles. We have Satya Yuga, which is the golden age, the silver age, the copper age, and then the iron age. And that cycle of ages lasts for 4,320,000 years. The age that we're currently in is called the Kali Yuga, or the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. This age that we're in, which is about 5,000 years into it, lasts for 432,000 years. So there's more degradation to come in terms of value systems and general happiness of people, etc.
So our rebirth here would be back into this
Kali Yuga?
Yeah, Kali Yuga.
Yes. So we might come back into the Kali Yuga, yes. Until one receives moksha. Or we could just stick around for another 432,000 years and experience the next golden age. But it's still material world. So the encouragement of the Gita is to kind of stop this samsara program, stop the cycle of birth and death.
Okay, so if we stop it and we have moksha, then basically we are equal to God up there. We are God, or we are equal to God, or but
We become one with, but still different from. Consider just like a green parrot entering into a green tree. You can't tell the difference because the green parrot's so merged into the green tree. Similarly, we become one in interest with God. We become one in affection and love and relationship with God, but we're still individual souls in the spiritual realm serving God.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, any last comment or question or reflection? Yeah.
This is true. I just want to say, again, thank you for your time. For me in particular, this chapter is very heavy.
Mm,
So, I'm definitely going to go back and listen. It seemed, how do I say? I'm a little embarrassed to say, but I know that's my ego. It seemed hard to grasp it all. And I don't know if it's because I'm coming from an outside perspective, so to speak. It seemed complicated because while I was listening, and by the way, this is like no judgment. I'm just seeking. I'm striving to learn. So this is no judgment in a negative way.
sure.
But as I'm listening, I'm like, man, this seems very complicated to me. It just seems like, okay, the demigods and everything. Yeah, so just giving some feedback. You asked about reflection, so that's where I am. So I want to go back and listen. I mean, I have to listen. I want to listen to the whole thing, all of the series again. But I think this is one that I definitely have to like listen again. I'm working, so I'm sort of multitasking. I think I have to really sit with this one. So that's pretty much where I am.
Yeah, thanks for being so candid, and I appreciate that, True. As someone trying to present some of these things, I will be vulnerable and say that it's tough for me too. I will say I've cut out a lot of stuff that I thought might be more complicated because there's a few things, the subtleties and layers of information that were cut out, but I get it. I get it can be a little overwhelming, a little complicated, and perhaps not so chewable and digestible the first go around. I will say this though is my personal experience with this stuff is you're talking about chapter 9. Let me share with you. When I was 17 years old, I started reading the Bhagavad Gita as it is, the book that we are sort of going through here. And I was excited. I was like, yeah, I've got the Bhagavad Gita. I'm really excited. I started to read the introduction. I got a few pages through and I said, oh my goodness, I can't understand. And you're talking about chapter 9. I'm talking about the introduction. I couldn't understand the first 2 pages of the introduction. And my realization at that point is like, gosh, I need a teacher. That was my conclusion. I didn't then revisit the Gita until I, turned 21. So 4 years was a break from anything spiritual, I would say. And the other thing I will comment, that was my experience too, but the other thing I was comment is that when I started to hear these messages and then repeated hearing over time and asking questions and those kind of things, this, like you said, there's a seeker mentality. Things started to be clear up for me and become more sort of something I could not just understand, but imbibe as well.
You know what? Thank you for sharing that, because what I realized is I'm being impatient. This is my first introduction to the book, and I don't have a teacher. I'm getting on a call once a week for the most part because I work 2 jobs and I'm also in school, and so I have to be patient. That's what I'm realizing. I have to be patient, digest it, And so thank you for sharing that about your experience
Yeah.
and that you went through a similar thing. If you can say, just so I can, take away something from chapter 9, right? Just something very basic. I think what I think is like the thing that stood out to me is that, with Krishna consciousness is just everything you mentioned, like going to the gym, which is something I do. So going to the gym and everything I do, just like dedicated to Krishna, so to speak. I don't think you use the word dedicate, but if you can say like one simple thing,
You
one
got it.
basic
Take
thing,
it. Take that. If
that's it.
that hit your heart,
Okay.
take that with you. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
All right. So I'm conscious of the time, and we're 8 minutes over time, so I don't want to keep you guys here. But thank you all very much. Appreciate your participation today, and hope you'll have the rest of your wonderful upcoming week. And we'll pick up chapter 10 next time. Hopefully, Prakash's health restores, and he can be back to share.
Thank you, Yamuna.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.